Welcome to the mini book podcast, African American Books Edition. Today we are looking at the book In Peace and Freedom, My Journey in Selma by Bernard LaFayette Jr. and Kathryn Lee Johnson. We thank you for listening, and please consider subscribing for future content. After hearing this podcast, we would encourage you to go out and purchase this book and support the author. The voices you hear come from AI, but the content comes straight from the book, and we feel that this is a great way to learn about African American history. So, to get us started today, I want to ask you, the listener, to imagine something. Imagine living in a county where out of 15,000 eligible Black adults, only 156 are officially allowed to vote.
Yeah, it's just a staggering number to even try and comprehend.
It really is, barely 1%. And today we're going to explore how a 22-year-old college student walked into a town that was so completely dangerous, his own civil rights organization had literally crossed it off their map.
With a giant black X.
Exactly, just crossed it out.
And, the mission for our discussion today is to really examine the incredible on-the-ground history of the Selma voting rights movement. We are looking at it directly through the eyes of someone who lived it, Bernard LaFayette Jr.
Right.
We want to analyze the actual mechanics of nonviolent organizing. The book really breaks down the sheer human courage it took to overcome institutional terror.
Because it wasn't just bad laws. It was a culture of total fear.
Absolutely.
So think about volunteering for a job where complete strangers on airplanes tell you must be desperate just for going to this town.
Yeah, just seeing your ticket to Selma.
Right. It's 1962. Young Bernard LaFayette Jr. asks his leadership for an assignment to direct a voter registration campaign in Alabama.
And they tell him there's only one spot left.
Selma, the place they had previously rejected because early scouts reported the white establishment was just too hostile.
And the Black citizens were too afraid to even speak to them.
But he takes the job anyway. Now, before we get into what happened when he arrived, the book talks a lot about two major civil rights groups coordinating these efforts, SNCC and SCLC.
Right, and it's really important to differentiate those two.
Could you break those acronyms down for us?
Sure. So first you have SNCC, spelled SNCC, usually pronounced SNCC. That stands for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee.
And they were mostly younger folks, right?
Exactly. They're an autonomous group of young college activists. Their main focus was direct action.
Like the sit-ins.
Right, the lunch counter sit-ins, the freedom rides. You can think of SNCC as the grassroots organizers doing the really granular, often dangerous neighborhood-level work. They were the boots on the ground.
And then SCLC.
That is the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. This was the organization led by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
Which had a very different vibe.
Very different. The SCLC was heavily rooted in the Black church network across the South. They had the weight of established ministers and were focused on bringing massive national attention to local movements.
So SNCC is the radical youth in the trenches, and SCLC is the established church leadership bringing the national spotlight.
That's a great way to look at it.
Yeah.
And Lafayette went into Selma primarily as a SNCC director.
Okay, so he arrives in Selma to do this dangerous, under-the-radar organizing. And you really get a sense of how totally powerless the Black community was when you read about what he witnessed almost immediately upon arriving.
Oh, the car crash.
The car crash, it is an outrageous story. The book describes this peaceful highway scene. Suddenly, a white driver in an overloaded yellow feed truck comes barreling over a hill.
Going way too fast.
Way too fast. And he just slams right into the back of a Black man's car. The impact is so hard it knocks the car completely into a ditch, flips it over, and the Black driver is left sitting there bleeding from a severe head gash.
While the white driver is actually trapped in his truck.
Right. So the local police finally arrive, and you would think they'd help the bleeding victim. But the book details how the officers completely ignore the Black man.
They don't even check on his injuries.
Not at all. Instead, they stand there openly discussing, charging him with reckless driving.
The victim.
Yes, the victim. Simply because his car happened to be physically in the way of the white driver's speeding truck.
It's infuriating to read, but the authors use that specific incident as a perfect illustration of the entire social structure of Selma. Black citizens legally possessed zero leverage. None.
Which brings us back to that unbelievable statistic. 156 registered voters out of 15,000 eligible adults.
And the system that kept those numbers so low was anchored by something called the literacy test.
Which sounds like a basic reading exam, but it really wasn't.
Not even close. The book breaks this down brilliantly. We tend to think of a literacy test as, can you read this paragraph? But it was actually a highly weaponized, unfair government practice.
Designed specifically to stop Black people from voting.
Exactly. The applications were loaded with nearly impossible questions about obscure government trivia. But the real trick, the truly impossible barrier, was that the test was graded entirely on the subjective whim of the white registrars.
So the grader could just fail you because they wanted to.
Precisely. The book notes that a Black applicant could hold a college degree, answer everything perfectly, and still be told they failed. Meanwhile, a white applicant who could barely read a sentence would be waved right through.
Just a completely rigged game.
And if that wasn't enough, there was the vouching system.
Oh, right. Explain the vouching.
To even submit a voter application, a new applicant needed a currently registered voter to officially vouch for them.
But there are only 156 registered Black voters in the whole county.
Exactly. So finding someone willing to stick their neck out, risk their job, or even risk their physical safety just to vouch for you, it was an almost impossible hurdle.
So how do you even begin to organize people against a system like that, especially when they are terrified? Lafayette describes this suffocating atmosphere of fear.
The barbershop story really captures that.
Yes. He walks into a local Black barbershop just to get a haircut. There are no other customers in the shop, but the barbers are so terrified of being seen with an outside civil rights worker, they literally pretend to be busy.
They start cleaning their tools.
They completely ignore him. They refuse to even make eye contact or speak to him. They would rather lose business than risk the retaliation that would come from just cutting his hair.
And that's the reality of the terror. You cannot start a movement with a massive, loud rally when the people you are trying to help will cross the street just to avoid looking at you.
So what was his strategy?
He had to rely on a strategy of secret support. The book explains how he didn't go big right away. He found local heroes, people who had already been quietly fighting the system.
People like Amelia Boynton.
Yes, Amelia Boynton, who was part of a very brave local group known as the Courageous Eight. Instead of public spectacles, they started holding secret night meetings.
Just sitting in people's living rooms.
Sitting at kitchen tables with the blinds drawn. And they started simple. They just taught people how to fill out the registration forms.
Even though they knew the registrars would probably reject them anyway?
Right. But the physical act of filling out the form, of asserting that right on paper, it built personal confidence. It gave these citizens a profound sense of self-worth. They were overcoming this psychological barrier first.
Building courage in the dark. But eventually, they had to step out into the light. And when they did, they ran right into Sheriff Jim Clark.
The ultimate antagonist of this story.
The book paints a terrifying picture of him. He is the absolute embodiment of segregationist law enforcement. He wore a military-style uniform and an actual combat helmet.
He treated civil rights as a military insurgency.
And he immediately targeted Lafayette. There is this outrageous moment where Lafayette gets pulled over and arrested on a completely bogus charge of vagrancy.
Which is a very common tactic. Vagrancy essentially means wandering around without a home or visible means of financial support. It was a catch-all charge used to harass organizers.
But the trial that followed this arrest ended up being a huge turning point, didn't it?
It really was. Civil rights lawyers came down to defend Lafayette, and they actually got Sheriff Clark on the witness stand.
And they just grilled him.
They systematically dismantled his authority in open court. They asked Clark, "Did you check Mr. Lafayette's refrigerator to see if he had food before charging him with vagrancy?"
Did you check his employment records?
Exactly. And Clark had to admit he hadn't done any of that. For the local Black citizens sitting in that courtroom, watching a white segregationist sheriff be humiliated and outsmarted by Black lawyers, it completely shifted the psychological power dynamic.
But that victory came with a huge price. Humiliating the sheriff put a massive physical target on Lafayette's back.
The retaliation was swift.
The book describes this terrifying sequence right after that. Lafayette is taken to jail, but then, in the middle of the pitch-black country night, they force him out.
A classic setup.
He is taken into an alleyway where a white man brutally beats him. And then comes the shakedown. To survive the night, Lafayette is forced to pay $150, but he doesn't pay a court clerk.
No, nothing official.
He has to hand over $10 bills to a deputy, who then silently hands the cash to some anonymous farmer sitting in the dark cab of a pickup truck.
Operating completely outside the law.
Lafayette describes turning his back to walk away from that truck, fully expecting a bullet to hit the back of his head. He thought he was going to die right there in the dirt.
And that story really illustrates the absolute lawlessness that these activists faced. They were fighting a shadow system of violence. But the authors point out something fascinating about that night.
What's that?
When the local community saw that Lafayette was willing to take a severe beating, get extorted, and risk a bullet to the head just to stay in Selma, everything changed.
He proved he wasn't going to run away.
Exactly. And because of that physical vulnerability, the secret kitchen meetings started to overflow. They eventually had to transition into public mass meetings held in the local churches.
But moving to the churches meant the mobs knew exactly where they were.
Yes.
Which leads to one of the most unbelievable details in the book. A mass meeting is happening, and it is almost destroyed by a violent mob. But it gets saved by an incredibly unlikely ally.
The high school football coach.
A white high school football coach.
Yeah.
The book describes a truck full of armed young white men pulling up to the church, getting ready to attack the people inside, and suddenly a car screeches to a halt.
An older white man jumps out.
He walks right up to this armed mob, stands in front of the truck, and orders them to go home immediately. And the crazy thing is, they listen. They put their heads down and drive away.
Because he was their former football coach.
They still feared his authority from their high school days, and he single-handedly stopped a bloodbath.
It is an amazing anecdote.
Yeah.
And that kind of spontaneous de-escalation allowed the movement to survive long enough to really scale up. It eventually reached the point where Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the SCLC came to Selma.
Because Selma finally fit Dr. King's exact blueprint for a campaign right.
Perfectly. The book outlines Dr. King's 4 criteria for a successful campaign. This is the analytical side of the movement. First, a campaign needed a distinct beginning and an end.
To manage resources and stop activist burnout.
Right. Second, it had to be a local problem that highlighted a much broader global issue. Selma's extreme voter suppression exposed the total lack of democracy across the entire American South.
What was the third?
Strict training in nonviolent strategies. Everyone had to be disciplined. And fourth, the ultimate goal had to be transforming the attitudes of the local community.
Okay, regarding that third point, the strict training in nonviolence, Lafayette did something later in his career that completely blew my mind. It ties right back to this idea of discipline.
The vice lords.
Yes. The book talks about how Lafayette actually recruited and trained members of the vice lords gang from Chicago.
Actual street gang members.
Tough young men who already had physical scars from gang battles. And he brings them into the movement.
He trained them in the tactics of nonviolence and brought them down south to act as marshals for the marches.
Which sounds completely counterintuitive. You take guys who are used to street fighting and place them directly in front of violent, racist mobs. How did that not turn into a riot?
Because of how Lafayette framed nonviolence. The authors emphasize that nonviolence was never about passivity or weakness. It required immense active psychological strength.
So they used their toughness in a different way.
Exactly. Yeah. These former gang members had the discipline to take a hit. They were brought in to act as a literal buffer zone of human flesh. They would bat down flying glass bottles with their own bodies to protect the peaceful protesters, and they refused to fight back.
Just absorbing the violence.
By absorbing it without retaliating, they disrupted the cycle of aggression and forced the entire world to witness the unprovoked brutality of the segregationists.
And that brutality just kept escalating. The authorities pushed things to an absolute breaking point. The book details the tragic murder of Jimmie Lee Jackson.
A truly heartbreaking moment.
It was a peaceful night march in a nearby town that was violently broken up by state troopers. And during the chaos, Jimmie Lee Jackson, who was unarmed, was shot and killed while trying to protect his mother.
And the outrage over his murder is what sparked the idea for the massive 54-mile march from Selma to Montgomery.
They wanted to march directly to the state capitol to demand federal intervention, but the local judges tried to stop them legally.
Yes, by using injunctions.
Can you break down exactly how they use those?
Sure. An injunction is basically a strict court order that commands a person or a group to stop doing a specific action. In Selma, the segregationist judges weaponized these court orders. They issued injunctions making it a literal crime for more than 3 people to gather together in public.
3 people? That basically bans being outside with your family.
It was a complete violation of the First Amendment right to assembly. They used the gavel to mandate segregation, and when the citizens decided to march anyway, law enforcement used that injunction as their legal cover to unleash extreme violence.
Which leads us to Bloody Sunday.
March 7, 1965.
The authors detail the horror of that day on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Marchers walking peacefully, only to be met by men on horseback wielding clubs and tear gas. People were trampled. The footage shocked the entire nation.
It forced the federal government to finally step in and provide protection so the march to Montgomery could actually be completed.
But even after the march successfully finished weeks later, the terror didn't stop. The book recounts the deeply unsettling story of Viola Liuzzo.
Her story really shows the sheer desperate reach of the Klan's retaliation.
She was a white mother of 5 from Detroit. She saw the footage of Bloody Sunday on television and was so moved that she drove all the way down to Alabama just to help shuttle marchers back and forth.
She was just trying to provide transportation.
And the book highlights the barbaric nature of what happened to her. She was driving on a dark stretch of highway with a young black teenager named Leroy Moton in the passenger seat. A car full of Ku Klux Klan members pulled up next to them and opened fire,
Murdering her instantly.
Her car crashes deep into a ditch, and the detail about Leroy Moton's survival is just terrifying. He falls into Viola's lap, completely covered in her blood, and he makes a split-second decision to just play dead.
He had to lie there in the wreckage.
The Klan members walk down to the car. They look inside the shattered windows, see all the blood, assume they are both dead, and walk away. Leroy had to wait in that silent, bloody car before dragging himself up to the highway to flag down help.
It forces you as the reader to really confront the reality of these sacrifices. Innocent lives were taken just to maintain a system of racial terror. But the authors connect these profound local sacrifices to the ultimate national victory.
The Voting Rights Act?
Yes. The relentless, nonviolent pressure applied by the citizens of Selma and the horror of the violence they absorbed completely forced the hand of the federal government. President Lyndon B. Johnson introduced the Voting Rights Act of 1965.
Which fundamentally changed American democracy.
It outlawed those discriminatory literacy tests, it abolished the vouching systems, and it provided federal oversight. It changed everything.
It's an incredible historical journey, starting with a town deemed too dangerous to touch, where people were terrified to even make eye contact, and culminating in the president signing a law that reshaped the country.
All because ordinary people decided to conquer their fear. Which really brings us to a final lingering question that Lafayette raises in his account. And it's something I want to leave you, the listener, to mull over today.
What's that?
Well, we've talked so much about the legal and physical battles of Selma, right? But Lafayette noted something profound. He said that changing a law only works if people change inside.
Right.
He called it internal transformation.
Right.
The people of Selma had to achieve psychological liberation from the shackles of hopelessness long before they could ever march across that bridge. So think about our modern world. Are there places in our society today where we might have legal equality documented on paper, but we still lack that psychological liberation?
That's a powerful thought.
Where do we still need that internal transformation that the people of Selma fought so hard to achieve?
Please remember to subscribe and tell others about this podcast. Also, we'd love it if you could suggest in the comments books that you would like to hear in future episodes. Thank you so much for subscribing and listening.